3 doctors vanished from medicine forever. 1 patient disappeared without a trace, and the only surviving record was hidden in an attic for over a century. This is not fiction. This is a real historical horror case that the town of Millbrook, Massachusetts tried to erase in 1847. The patient's name was Latoya. She came in with no memory, no illness, and no explanation for why everyone around her began to change. Her presence triggered dreams of the dead voices and forgotten tongues and visions no science could explain. Local churches sealed the records. The hospital burned its logs. But one doctor kept a secret journal, and what he documented over 37 days challenges everything we know about human consciousness. If you're ready to uncover the most chilling, suppressed history in America's haunted medical past, stay with me. This is the story of the infirmary that remembers the dead, even when the living try to forget. The moment she crossed the threshold of the Blessed Mercy Infirmary, something in that building began to shift. At first it was subtle flickering lanterns, prayers spoken with less certainty, patients waking with unfamiliar names on their tongues. But within days, the hospital that had served Millbrook for over a decade became the epicenter of one of the most disturbing medical cases in American history. 3 doctors resigned from medicine entirely. 1 minister suffered a mental collapse. The patient vanished, and every official record of her treatment was destroyed. Almost. Over a century later, a leather-bound journal was found in a sealed crate in the attic of a farmhouse once owned by Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, the hospital's chief physician, in 1847. The entries inside meticulous clinical and deeply shaken detail, 37 days of unexplained phenomena, spiritual disturbance, and psychic trauma surrounding a woman known only as Latoya. Her name does not appear in any census, any parish registry, or medical record from the time. The journal is the only trace she left behind. This is not a ghost story. This is a true unsolved mystery, buried beneath layers of religious silence, social shame, and institutional fear. The events occurred in the winter of 1847, just outside Salem, Massachusetts, a place already steeped in paranoia and persecution. But what unfolded at Blessed Mercy was not witchcraft, nor illness, nor possession as we know it. It was something older, something collective, something that knew the shape of our buried guilt. Latoya did not arrive sick. She was not wounded, delirious, or hysterical. She arrived aware. Aware of the rooms before she entered them. Aware of the people before they spoke. She brought with her no past, but everyone who came near her began to remember things they had spent a lifetime trying to forget. This case was never meant to be revealed. The church ordered silence. The state closed its eyes. Families who had loved ones in that hospital received no explanations. But the journal survived, and now so has her story. If you're watching this, you've likely sensed it already, that some places hold on to pain like it's part of their foundation. That some stories resist the grave. This is the beginning of one of those stories. A real historical horror hidden behind whitewashed walls and forgotten prayers. And it begins with a woman the world refused to remember, but who never stopped remembering the world. The journal begins with clinical distance, inked lines, vital signs, estimated age. But by the 7th page, Dr. Aldrich is no longer writing as a physician. He's writing as a witness. A witness to something that unsettled every law of reason he'd sworn to uphold. The patient had been admitted under unusual circumstances, discovered in the snow outside a church, 2 towns over, barefoot eyes, open pulse, steady, and skin warm despite the below-freezing wind chill. No family, no injury, no signs of frostbite. She spoke only a handful of words, none of them in English. Latoya, she said, then nothing else. She was neither violent nor catatonic. She walked 8 and obeyed instructions, but always after the order was given, never during. As if waiting for everyone around her to play out the scene she'd already seen. It is as though she has been here before, Aldrich wrote. But not in body, in memory. Her clothes were handmade, poorly stitched from multiple fabrics, some Caribbean, others native, even a European corset panel sewn sideways along her back. In her palm, she clutched a small tin locket filled not with hair or photo, but a pinch of soil. Black, damp, and sweet-smelling. No one could determine its origin. From her first night in the infirmary, the other patients began to change. One elderly woman awoke from a 2-year catatonia and began humming a lullaby in a language her nurse couldn't identify. A Civil War veteran started sleepwalking, muttering phrases in Yoruba. A child named Samuel, previously considered mute, spoke clearly for the first time in months, but the words weren't his. "She's not here to die," he said. "She's here to remember." That sentence appears multiple times in the journal. Variations of it appear in other people's mouths, people who'd never spoken to each other. She's here to remember. Not to recover. Not to repent. Not even to be treated. Just to remember. Aldrich's tone grows more urgent as the days pass. His notes begin ending in ellipses. He references dreams he cannot recall, footsteps he hears at night, and an overwhelming scent of burnt sugar that none of the staff can trace. The deeper he tries to understand her, the more the lines blur between doctor and subject, between caretaker and carrier, between science and something else, something older than medicine. She is not what haunts this hospital, he writes. She is what draws it out. By the 12th entry, the journal shifts from observation to confession. "I do not believe she came to us," Aldrich admits. "I believe we were called to her." No one in Millbrook ever spoke of the girl again. Not the nuns who housed her. Not the doctors who examined her. Not the patients who whispered her name in dreams. When asked decades later about the events of winter 1847, those who remained alive offered only blank expressions and gentle deflections. That was a hard season. We lost many then. I was too young to recall. But the journal says otherwise. Within its yellowed pages lies a testimony too detailed to ignore, and too terrifying to accept. Dr. Aldrich describes events that violated the boundary between patient and physician memory, and reality, body and spirit. He feared not what Latoya would do, but what she would reveal. She did not seek attention. She did not plead. She simply listened. And yet in her stillness, others began to unravel. One nurse confessed to a crime no one had accused her of. A patient slit his wrists and wrote a prayer in blood, but not in any known language. When a priest was brought in to bless the ward, he fainted upon entering her room. What terrified them wasn't Latoya's presence. It was what they remembered in her presence. Generations of silenced pain, ancestral guilt, forgotten wrongs buried beneath polite society and whitewashed institutions. She didn't speak them aloud, but everyone heard. Aldrich writes, "There is a weight around her that presses language out of the mind. It is not fear. It is knowing. So why the silence? Why erase her from every record?" Because Latoya was not just a medical anomaly, she was a mirror. One that reflected back centuries of complicity, cruelty, and spiritual amnesia. And some truths are more unbearable than ghosts. What do you do with a patient who reminds an entire town of what it agreed to forget? You bury the name. You burn the records. You say nothing. But the earth does not forget. And neither does she. This is not the tale of a haunted hospital. It is the tale of a haunted history. And Latoya. She was its voice. She was the quietest presence the infirmary had ever received, but she altered the rhythm of the building the moment she arrived. A young woman with no wounds, no fever, and no past. Carried in by two locals who had found her standing barefoot in the snow outside St. Elwick's chapel. She hadn't knocked. She hadn't spoken. She had simply waited. Eyes open. Breathing steady. Watching something none of them could see. Her name she offered only once, Latoya. When asked to repeat it, she blinked, confused, as if hearing it for the first time. No one in the region recognized the name. No records matched her face. No dialect aligned with the syllables she spoke when restless in sleep. What puzzled the staff wasn't just her condition, it was her precision. She never turned her head unless someone was about to enter the room. She never reached for food unless a tray was coming. Her responses weren't reactions, they were rehearsals. She behaves as though we are ghosts, Aldrich wrote. As if we are fading remnants of something she already survived. She wore a tattered shift, stitched from clashing fabrics, some French colonial, some West African, some likely handwoven. In her palm, a small tin locket, containing 7 tiny coins and a pinch of foreign soil. The soil remained moist for weeks, even as the winter air cracked the lips of every patient in the ward. Nurses began to report déjà vu. Patients spoke of memories that weren't theirs. Footsteps echoed down halls that were physically empty but emotionally full. The chapel bell rang at the wrong hour, always, just before someone died. Was she possessed? That question hovered in every room but was never asked aloud. She showed no aggression, no malice, just stillness. And from that stillness, a sense of order. She did not bring chaos, Aldrich wrote. She brought a strange correction. As if the world had veered off course, and her presence realigned it by force. The more they observed her, the more uncertain they became of their own observations. What if the anomaly wasn't the girl, but time itself? What if she wasn't sick, but the hospital was? And if that was true? What did she come here to fix? The objects Latoya carried became as disturbing as her silence. A tin locket, scratched with unfamiliar symbols containing 7 ancient-looking coins, none bearing a date, a nation, or any recognizable figure. A pinch of dark soil that smelled faintly of salt water and bloodroot. Beneath her nails, microscopic sand fragments that matched neither the local rivers nor the nearby coast. And yet, when asked where she was from, she merely stared into the distance. Not confused, not afraid, just remembering. The nurses cleaned her, dressed her, and tried to place her in the registry. But the registry book refused to hold her name. Every time a staff member attempted to write Latoya in the admissions log, the ink would smear, or the page would tear. One nurse claimed the page turned brittle in her hands like funeral parchment. Another whispered, "It's as if the paper itself doesn't want her remembered." She didn't speak for the first 3 days. Not a single word. But on the 4th night during a windstorm, the chapel doors blew open and the bell tolled twice, even though no rope had been pulled. The next morning she whispered 3 syllables no one recognized. When repeated to a patient of Ashanti descent, he went pale and asked for immediate transfer. "I know that name," he said, "but not from here." The other patients began to react. One woman, previously comatose, opened her eyes and began reciting the details of a slave ship, manifest from 1782, names, weights, brands burned into flesh. A boy recovering from fever began to draw symbols on the walls that matched those carved inside the locket. They were not dreams. They were transmissions. It was as if her presence unlocked a memory stored not in the brain, but in the blood. Dr. Aldrich attempted to question her with a translator versed in multiple tribal tongues, but Latoya refused to respond. Only once did she speak again, and not to them. She turned to an empty corner of the infirmary and muttered, "You buried them wrong." No one else had been in the room, but that corner had once been part of the hospital's original foundation, a space used decades earlier to store unclaimed remains during outbreaks. She knew things no living person could know. And worse, she made others start knowing too. The closer people got to Latoya, the more they began to lose pieces of themselves. Not in the sense of madness or violence, but of disorientation. A young assistant forgot her own name mid-sentence. A physician misplaced the order of years in his records. One nun stood paralyzed for 2 hours, convinced it was still 1810. They weren't hallucinating. Their bodies functioned. They could read, walk, speak. But something inside them, something that tracked time, identity, and linear memory, was slipping. As if contact with Latoya caused a fraying not of the mind, but of reality's stitching. Aldrich recorded his own episodes with growing unease. One morning, he wrote, he found himself weeping in front of a stained glass window he had never seen before. The window depicted a woman cradling bones beneath a tree, surrounded by 7 birds with their beaks sewn shut. No one else could see it. It was not part of the hospital's design. "She isn't changing us," he noted. "She's returning us to something older. Something we once were before language stepped between us." Latoya remained mostly still during these shifts, silent hands folded, eyes half lowered. But during the episodes of others, she would tilt her head slightly as if listening to something beneath the surface. Like someone tuning a radio, one nurse whispered. "She's not reacting. She's receiving." Then came the event on day 12. During morning rounds, a former soldier named Gideon fell to the floor convulsing, not from seizure but from memory. He began screaming in Haitian Creole despite never having left New England. In between gasps, he described a plantation, the screams of women, the scent of burning flesh and molasses. Latoya did not move, but her lips were mouthing the exact same words. When the fit ended, Gideon stared at her and whispered, "It was you. I remember now." But the timeline made no sense. The event he described had occurred in 1791, years before Latoya could have been born if she'd ever been born at all. The staff began keeping distance. One by one they requested transfers, reassignments, or silent leave. No one wanted to be near the room anymore. Because Latoya wasn't just stirring ghosts, she was reactivating something in the living. Not haunting. Not possession. A kind of historical interference. A rethreading of memory through shared bloodlines, unspoken pain, and the fractured mirror of American history. She wasn't the anomaly. We were. By the third week, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary was no longer a place of healing. It had become a containment zone for something no one could define. The corridors darkened unnaturally, candles extinguished without wind. And most disturbingly, the patients who hadn't interacted with Latoya began to exhibit symptoms of those who had. The phenomenon was spreading, without contact, without proximity, as if the memory she carried had become airborne. Dr. Aldrich began documenting what he called temporal contamination. Staff reported dreams in languages they didn't speak. A cook refused to enter the east hallway, claiming it led somewhere else during certain hours. A midwife delivered a stillborn child and claimed she saw its eyes open before anyone else had entered the room. That child, she insisted, looked exactly like her brother, who had died in the Atlantic crossing 50 years prior. It was no longer her, Aldrich wrote. It was the past itself, leaking. By now the other physicians had stopped assisting. They refused to enter the wing where Latoya stayed. Supplies were left outside her door. Notes were passed under it. She was not restrained. She did not scream. But still, they feared her more than any violent patient they'd ever treated. That fear became policy. The church issued an internal directive: do not speak the name. Do not approach the room without clerical accompaniment. Do not under any circumstance accept her touch. But by then, it was too late. Latoya had already touched something in all of them. The hospital staff began to break. One nurse locked herself in the chapel and refused to eat. Another was found writing symbols across her own arms in chalk, whispering, "She's not asking for help. She's asking for witnesses." Dr. Aldrich found blood beneath his fingernails, but no wounds. He no longer remembered certain hallways. He accused his own reflection of blinking at the wrong time. "I have begun to fear the walls," he wrote. "They remember more than we do." The infirmary wasn't haunted. It was remembering. And the people inside it were forgetting which memories belonged to them. By day 21, the infirmary no longer functioned as an institution. It had become a pressure chamber of memory, cracking under weight it was never built to hold. Latoya hadn't moved rooms, hadn't spoken above a whisper. But the disturbance she brought was no longer localized. It infected the air, the floors, the walls. The walls were weeping. Moisture began seeping through the plaster in her hallway, though no pipes ran behind them. When examined, the liquid tested similar to amniotic fluid. A nurse fainted upon touching it. "It feels like something unborn," she whispered. "Something waiting." Priests were summoned, 2 from Boston, 1 from Providence. All 3 refused to perform exorcism rites. One wept uncontrollably in the stairwell and muttered, "This is not possession. This is reckoning." Reckoning. That word appears 9 times in Aldrich's entries, as if the hospital were facing a judgment it had long delayed. Patients confessed sins they never committed. Staff recalled events from lifetimes they'd never lived. One orderly quit after claiming he saw his dead sister's wedding play out inside a mirror, except she was wearing chains instead of a dress. "We are not being haunted by her," Aldrich wrote. "We are being haunted by ourselves." At night, the building moaned like timber in storm, even without wind. Doors wouldn't stay shut. Clocks spun forward, then reversed. One nurse's calendar repeated the same day for 5 consecutive pages. She insisted she'd lived that day 5 times. Her shoes wore differently each morning. The line between perception and reality dissolved. No one could agree on what was real anymore. The church recommended evacuation, but no one wanted to move her. The last time they'd tried, 2 men collapsed before reaching the threshold. One bled from the ears. The other forgot his own mother's face. The town began to turn away. Families pulled their sick out of the infirmary. Carriages arrived, but no drivers dared step inside. Millbrook became silent, isolated. Like it too was under quarantine, not from disease, but from knowing. She remembers what we buried, Aldrich concluded. And now, so do we. But the question no one dared ask was this. If she came to remember then, what exactly have we forgotten? And more importantly, why did we choose to forget it in the first place? It happened on day 30, and no one could explain how. During a routine linen check, Nurse Adelaide opened Latoya's drawer and found a stack of letters. A dozen in total, all aged handwritten and addressed to someone named Josephine. What chilled her wasn't the name but the handwriting. It was her own. The ink. The phrasing. The slight leftward tilt in the capital J. She had never written these letters before, but they spoke of things only she could know: childhood moments, secret fears, the exact date her brother died in childbirth, a memory she'd never shared with anyone. She collapsed. When she awoke, she asked to speak to Latoya. Alone. What happened in that room was never fully recorded. But when Adelaide exited, she was crying not in fear but recognition. She walked out of the infirmary barefoot into the snow and was never seen again. That's when Aldrich broke. He returned to his journal and began writing not observations but confessions. He spoke of dreams where he wandered fields of faceless children, each holding a locket. He described hearing lullabies in his sleep in a language he'd never studied, but somehow understood. Then came the revelation. The hospital had been built atop the remains of a failed colonial holding. One where unclaimed women had been interned during the early 1700s, women from slave ships deemed too broken for labor. Officially, they had perished from cold. But rumors said they'd been buried alive beneath the chapel to avoid moral corruption. Latoya was not haunted. She was history incarnate. She wasn't just remembering. She was the memory. Aldrich's final coherent entry reads, "We mistook her for a patient. But she is the carrier. The echo of what this land tried to silence. And now by seeing her, we've inherited it." The lines that follow were scratched erratic. A sentence appears over and over in the margins over itself. She's not sick. We are. And then, blank pages. The final days of the infirmary's log are not medical reports. They are apologies. Please. Desperate questions written in spiraling ink. Dr. Aldrich stopped recording vitals. Instead, he wrote letters addressed to whom she remembers. Dozens of them. Each recounting a regret, each ending with the same phrase. If she remembers it, does that make it real? He had begun seeing Latoya in places she wasn't, reflected in pans of water, in the polished silver tray of surgical tools, in the corner of his eye always just outside focus, not malevolent, not invasive, but patient, waiting, watching him remember. Then came the final examination. In one last attempt to prove or disprove her reality, Aldrich examined Latoya under a magnifying lantern. What he discovered should have been impossible. Her pupils reacted to light not by contracting, but by dilating outward, absorbing it. Her pulse responded to questions in Latin more strongly than English. Her teeth bore filing patterns consistent with tribes long believed extinct. And beneath her fingernails, embedded in the dermis, were fragments of ochre, a pigment used in ancient burial rites across West Africa and pre-colonial New England. She was quite literally a mosaic of dead histories. Not a person, but a convergence. A vessel. A reckoner. In his final dictated recording, Aldrich said, "We do not study her. We are studied through her. We are her evidence." That sentence was scratched into the floorboards near her bed by morning. None of the staff claimed to write it. And then one by one they vanished. Not by death, but by disappearance. No records of transfer. No resignation letters. No graves. Just absence. Only the journal remained. And Latoya. Unaged. Unchanged. Still seated. Still watching. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Because she didn't have to. The remembering had already begun. In the final 3 days before the infirmary closed its gates, something changed, not in Latoya, but in the building itself. Windows looked out onto landscapes no longer matching the town. A hallway door opened to an impossible spiral staircase, One priest opened a closet and found it filled floor to ceiling with burned medical charts, records no one remembered creating. They had not found a patient. They had opened a vault. Dr. Aldrich, now pale and speaking in fragmented tongues, ceased sleeping. His final dictation, barely coherent, described seeing his own mother as a child, walking hand in hand with Latoya through a sugarcane field that had burned down decades before his birth. She walks with them, all he said. Through every fire, every ship, every silence. Staff began to report shared dreams. In them, Latoya stood at the center of a ruined chapel speaking to a congregation of skeletons who nodded in unison. They called her the Witness. Not a prophet. Not a saint. Something older. Something waiting. Then came the final anomaly. At 3:16 a.m. on the last night, every clock in the infirmary stopped, every flame extinguished, every mirror fractured. The walls began to leak, not blood, not water, but words. Names. Thousands of names. Burned into the wood, etched in bone-deep scratches across plaster, whispering in every room, we are remembered. And Latoya, still sitting, still silent. But smiling now. Just slightly. Because she had succeeded. The remembering was complete. She is not possessed, Aldrich had once insisted. She is possession itself, the living host of everything we swore to forget. The next morning, Latoya vanished from her room. No one saw her leave. No prints. No footprints in the snow. The infirmary was locked from the inside. All that remained was Aldrich's journal, and on its final page, written not in his hand, but in delicate looping script none of them recognized, to remember is to resurrect. To silence is to rot. I am the threshold. I do not knock. I wait. She had never been asking for help. She had been waiting for the door to open. And someone somewhere in that place had finally done it. The Blessed Mercy Infirmary was officially shuttered on February 19, 1848. The closure was quiet, without ceremony, no formal announcement, no mention in the local press, as if the town itself had agreed to forget. But forgetting proved impossible. The grounds were sold to a private family 2 years later. They lasted 3 weeks before fleeing in the night. Their written statement, later found in a drawer, read, "The walls whisper names we never knew. And now they know ours." The building stood abandoned for decades except for the lights. Lantern glows seen at 3:16 a.m. Shadows in the windows when no one was inside. Visitors described hearing a girl humming, but no one ever found her. Not even her footprints. In 1904, the state attempted to raise the structure. Every machine broke down on arrival. One foreman went blind in his left eye after dust touched his face. A second began writing unfamiliar names on his arms with a pickaxe head before collapsing. The project was abandoned. The blueprints were misplaced. No one ever built on that land again. Not out of superstition, out of memory, because deep down everyone remembered. And that's the most horrifying part. Latoya didn't possess people. She didn't need to. She offered no message, no prophecy. She merely reminded us of what we agreed centuries ago to bury beneath faith, medicine, and time. Not evil, just truth. Her gift was not madness, a retired orderly once said in 1912. It was memory. That's what drove us all insane. Dr. Aldrich was never seen again. His house stood untouched for 40 years, until it was discovered boarded from the inside, filled wall to wall, with sketches of Latoya in different eras, continents, and clothing. Same eyes, same posture, always watching. Every sketch bore the same inscription at the bottom. She waits where we forget. The journal remains under lock at the Massachusetts Medical Archive page. Access by written request only. 8 researchers have resigned after reading it. 2 disappeared. 1 attempted self-mummification, claiming he needed to preserve the memory in his flesh. To this day, no one knows where Latoya came from. But more chilling, no one knows if she ever truly left. They say memory fades. But some memories do not die, they migrate. Decades after Blessed Mercy closed, similar cases began surfacing across New England. Women speaking forgotten dialects in their sleep. Children recounting ship manifests from the 1700s. Entire towns dreaming the same landscape, a burned field, a silent chapel, a woman seated in the center, unmoving. In 1937, a linguist in Maine received an anonymous box of phonograph cylinders. When played, they revealed low chants in a hybrid tongue, West African Algonquian and Latin. One phrase repeated, "I carry what was denied." In 1951, a psychiatric hospital in Connecticut reported a patient who refused to eat unless facing true north. She claimed she was aligned with the remembering. When shown a photo of Latoya taken from the journal archive, she whispered, "She's not gone. She's become many." These were not isolated events. They were fractures, echoes, not hauntings, not delusions, recurrences. The name Latoya reappears in scattered asylum documents under different identities. L.T. Mother Oya patient, 37. The Red Witness. Always female. Always silent. Always remembering. One psychiatrist noted, "There is no profile for her. Only proximity, and when she is near, memory becomes viral." Today, researchers speculate on mass psychogenic illness, on cultural trauma expressing itself through archetype. But nothing explains the consistency. Nothing explains how those affected across centuries, countries, even continents describe the same hum, the same humming, the same woman. It is not belief that makes her real. It is repetition. You've heard of her in stories, in whispered superstitions, in lullabies that suddenly feel unfamiliar. She is not horror in the traditional sense. She is the refusal to forget, the living cost of silence. Latoya is not a ghost. She is an immune response, a reaction from memory itself rising to defend what was buried. The scariest part isn't that she once existed. It's that she may never have stopped. So when you find yourself humming a tune you don't remember learning, when your dreams shift to unfamiliar centuries, when a name you've never spoken brings tears to your eyes, ask yourself one question. What if she's remembering, through me? If you're still watching, ask yourself why. Because stories like this don't stay on the screen. They crawl. They echo. They remember you. In 1996, a college student writing a thesis on forgotten asylums visited the ruins of Blessed Mercy. He returned with soil samples. A month later, he was institutionalized after carving a spiral into the walls of his dorm over 700 times. He kept whispering, "She opened the door. Now, she walks the halls." In 2013, a museum curator in Boston archived Aldrich's recovered journal. Her notes were precise, clinical, until the final entry where she wrote, "I saw her in the reflection. Not in the glass. In the timing. She stood in the beat between seconds. That's where she waits." She disappeared 2 days later. And just last year, 2024, a voice memo surfaced online. It was 3 minutes long. Static, mostly. But in the background, a faint hum. The same hum reported in Latoya's presence. The user claimed it was recorded outside a newly built hospital in Ghana. The voice, not American, not African, not modern, but clear, feminine, and ancient. And it said only one thing: I never left. What if she isn't in one place? What if she's in all places where silence was used to bury pain? What if Latoya was never a name but a role, a pattern, a memory structure designed to survive forgetting, the final immune response of a people who were never mourned? And what if by learning her story you've now become part of it? This isn't about belief. It never was. It's about what you carry after the screen fades to black. So if you hear humming tonight, if you dream of a field you've never seen, if you wake up feeling watched but no one's there, don't speak. Don't move. Just remember, she only waits in those who forget. And now that you remember, she may not wait much longer. And maybe that's all she ever needed. Someone like you to remember. Not to explain her. Not to pity her. But to witness her. Because now her story is no longer buried in a forgotten infirmary. It's inside you. And that's where the real haunting begins. If something about this stayed with you, if a sentence, a sound, or a silence made your skin crawl, tell us. In the comments. Right now. Because if this video disappears like so many records did, your memory might be the only one left. So save this video. Share it before it fades. And if you dare to keep walking deeper into the forgotten, subscribe. We'll be waiting where the silence ends.